What are you talking about in your house at night at the moment? Are you giving voice to your fears? Around 6:02 or 6:03 every night we talk about the same thing. Go something like this. What are the numbers like? Oh yeah, about 572 cases tonight. Is that good? Well, it's better than yesterday. R8 is down to about 0.73 and the positivity is about 4.61. We've become amateur virologists. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know whether you're giving voice to your fears at the moment, whether it's at dinner, over the dinner table, or if you're out for walks with friends. But maybe you are. Maybe if you're a student, you're saying to yourself, will I ever get back these lost years? Time where I thought I was going to make significant friendships that are just not being made. Maybe you're thinking, I'm in my golden years. How many more of these have I got left? Will there be anything left of my business when I get back? If I go back to school, will I remember how to socialize with people? How am I going to put food on the table? How much loneliness can a person survive with? I don't know whether this pandemic, because we're so isolated and restricted, has caused things that we normally use for distraction to keep our fears at bay. Maybe this is allowing them to bubble up to the surface. There's a lot of us waiting for deliverance, waiting for our deliverer to come. Is there something that would give us the light at the end of this tunnel? Can we be sure and say we're going to get out of this someday? Maybe it's low numbers that you're looking out for. Maybe it's a low positivity rate or a low R number. For many people now, it's the vaccine. This vaccine rollout, is it going to allow us to have a summer holiday again? It could well be that at the moment that the fears of your life actually aren't even pandemic related, that there are things unbelievably that are worse for you than the pandemic. Will you get over this illness at all? Will this grief that you have ever go away? Will people start to like me? Will my children grow up to love Jesus and follow him? I don't know for certain what you're talking about on your walks or over dinner or wherever. I don't know for certain what the people of God were thinking about and talking about at the time of Isaiah, but I suspect one of the things that was really on their horizon was the Assyrians. Isaiah had told them that God was going to use Assyria to take over their land. Their enemy Assyria was going to wipe out their land because they hadn't been following God. And they're thinking to themselves, well, when is this going to happen? What will it look like? They're massing on the border. They're on their way. What will it look like for us not to have the things that we once had? What would it like to be carried off by another nation? I remember as a kid, and those of you as old as me and older will remember the Iraq War. And the Iraq War was happening at the time where Sky News, the 24-hour news service, got going. And there was a time for months where I remember thinking vividly, will the news ever lead with something that isn't to do with the Iraq War, General Schwarzkopf and President George Bush and all of that? It seemed like it was endless, like it would go on for absolutely forever. It seemed impossible that a day would come where we weren't talking about the Iraq War. God says in no uncertain terms that the Israelites, that there's a reality beyond what the Israelites are seeing in front of them. The thing that dominates their mind, the thing that seems to be so important to them, the thing that seems to be about to overwhelm them. God says it's not the big story, it's not the big picture. And what this is a call to see, to imagination. It's a call to imagine the big picture, the big story of the one who's really in control. What God says and what's recorded in chapter 10, what he says to Isaiah, is that chapter 10 verse 18, for example, speaking of the fire that God is going to bring on these Assyrians, he's saying these Assyrians are not going to be your enemy forever. They're not going to last forever. He says there, the splendor of his forests and fertile fields, it will completely destroy this fire, as when one who is ill wastes away. These Assyrians that seem like the greatest fear that you've ever had will one day go. This virus will be gone. This fear that you have will dissipate. We have this joke in our house that comes from a radio piece where two people were talking about whether Cork was an up-and-coming city compared to Dublin. And whatever happened, the people talking in this piece were talking about the number of cranes that you could see. So you could see, a lot of cranes in the city of Cork. Lots are happening, lots of building is happening. But Dublin has dozens of cranes everywhere. Cranes, a sign of a city that's happening and things are going on. Well, for the people of the time, forests and wood and trees were a sign of great prosperity. They allowed you to build boats and build houses and build buildings. And they were a sign of just plenty, of strength. And God says, this nation, Assyria, that with their great trees of their cedars of Lebanon, their oaks of Bashan, all of this. Those trees are going to be torn down and it's going to be a wasteland. They'll disappear. Verse 19 says the remaining trees of his forests will be so few that a child could write them down. So few that even a child could count them. God is going to do this. He's going to take this strength away from Assyria. They're not going to be strong forever. And the idea behind this, as Isaiah says this, is that the people would understand that they can take heart. That when they see the big picture, when they understand God's plan, when they take note of what God promises them, that it will ease their worries, that it will allow them to have courage and to go on. They're supposed to be emboldened by this. Verse 24, my people, says God who live in Zion, do not be afraid of the Assyrians who beat you with a rod and lift a club against you. You're going to be overrun by them, God says. They are going to take your land, but they're not going to have the last word in your lives. God is looking here for survivors. Verse 20 talks about a day when some survive. It talks about a remnant of Israel. There will always be a chance for those who cling to God to continue. God is looking for people to stick around through these tough days as the Assyrians mount on their border and look like they're going to overrun them. He wants them to cling on, even though he knows that their earthly circumstances are not going to be good at all. We've been talking over these days and months and weeks and months of the pandemic of, well, what is God doing in all of this? And I think Josh passed on something to me that I think is apt and helpful and is possibly one aspect of making sense of all of this, though I think there's many, and I actually think that there's lots that we don't know why it happens or can't even make sense of. But he said that he heard somebody say that what God is doing during all of this is pruning his vineyard. The vineyard is a picture of God's people. And the pruning happens so that although there's a lot taken away from the vineyard, it's so that growth can come. And it's clear that during this, that for churches, those who are sticking around, it's the people who maybe don't. It's the people who are really committed. The people who really do trust God and want to follow God. The people who really do want to put him first. I read an article in the Irish Times this week by somebody called Maria Jansen. And she's speaking about the loss of the casual churchgoer. She says they're experiencing in her church that the casual churchgoer is disappearing. And she writes, she says, religion for religion's sake is gone. Religion for religion's sake is gone, and that is not a bad thing. This is an opportunity to go deeper. It's an opportunity to discover God more. To say, despite these circumstances, which are awful and terrible, I can know God and I can grow in him. I'm so glad to see that in our church we've been weathering the storm, that people have been coming on and have been engaged with the church community as much as we can meet on Zoom, have been engaged with each other and been in contact with one another. And I'm so thankful for this year that we've got to this point of so long on Zoom, so long not being able to meet together, that we're not at a point where it's just the elders and my kids who have to come on. But there are people who are still engaging, that you're still here, that you still want to know God and follow God and grow in your faith. God says, cling on. I'm looking for survivors here. But thankfully, surviving doesn't sound like too much fun. And thankfully, according to Isaiah, it's not just about survival. There is a better day coming. The end of chapter 10 describes the fall of the pride system to the hand of God's judgment. That is, that he's going to humble all of those who think they're strong. He's not going to let them have the last word or be the big thing. Chapter 10, verse 33 says, the Lord Almighty will lop off the boughs with great power. He's not going to let these mighty nations survive, these mighty nations who have nothing to do with him. But will there be anything left when he's done all of this rooting out? What about God's promises to Abraham that his descendants would number more than the stars in the sky? How is that possible when only this remnant is going to exist? What about God's promise that one day he was going to send a restorer, a rescuer, who was going to gather God's people to him, and that people would be able to get to heaven? How can any of us prevail and stay alive if judgment is coming, if our best hope is just to survive? Well, Isaiah gives this extraordinary picture at the beginning of chapter 11 and verse 1. He talks about a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. So there's all of these boughs that are broken, we're told. That's the picture. But then there's this stump, and something is going to come out of it. And he calls it the stump of Jesse. Now, Jesse, who is Jesse? Jesse was the father of David. And so David was Jesse's son. And David was promised that one of his descendants, so a descendant of Jesse, would be an everlasting king. Isaiah says God has not forgotten his promises. We talked last week about the strange but necessary work of parenting that involves giving consequences to children because of if they're bold or if they've naughty actions. And I once gave one of the children a punishment that involved going to sit on the stairs for 60 seconds. After about 9 or 10 minutes, I hear this cry from the stairs, "Dad, Dad, Dad, where are you?" I had completely forgotten that there was a child on the step, and I had allowed the consequence to go on. Thankfully, God is a much better father than I am. He's not going to forget his promises. He's not going to let the consequence go on and on and on. The flourishing bud of Jesse will bear fruit. And he's not going to be any normal man, but he'll have the Spirit of the Lord resting on him. That's what it says there. He's going to have a spirit of wisdom and understanding, the spirit of counsel and of might. Counsel and of might? Those words, we've heard those before back in chapter 9. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. Here it is repeated again. There's one who's going to come, who's going to delight in the fear of the Lord, it says there at the beginning of chapter 11. And that doesn't mean that he's going to delight in trembling before God, but he's going to delight in giving God his place. That's what the phrase fear of the Lord means, to give God his place. And he's going to flourish in that and delight in it. Isaiah is in the Old Testament. And everything in there is written before Jesus was born. Everything in the Bible written after Jesus was born is called the New Testament. Isaiah is a book in the Old Testament. He was around about 700 years before Jesus and was talking about this one who would come in the future, who would be God's man on the earth, God on the earth. So then when we come to the New Testament, and particularly when we come to Luke in the New Testament, one of the books that describes the public life of Jesus' teaching, in chapter 1, he records there, for example, a cousin of Jesus talks about Jesus' birth, fulfilling the promise that God would raise up a saviour from the house of David. Jesse's son, David, a stump of Jesse. Okay, this Jesus fits this picture. Then in chapter 4, we find Jesus early in the time where he was publicly teaching, and he's reading from Isaiah chapter 61. It's a passage very like the one that we are reading right now in Isaiah chapter 11. This one comes from Isaiah chapter 61, but it's very similar to the one in Isaiah chapter 11. And it says there that the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners. So Jesus stands up in the synagogue and he reads this out. And then we got to get a moment that, could best be described, I hope it's okay to describe it like this, as Jesus' mic drop moment. So he reads this out, and he says that there's going to be somebody who comes. He reads it in the Bible that says there's going to be somebody who comes who makes sense of everything. Somebody who's able to give people their humanity, to free people, to liberate people, to show us what it's all about. He reads from the Bible to say that person is going to come. We read that what he does is he rolls up the scroll, he gives it back to the attendant in the synagogue. You can almost feel the hush as this is described by Luke. He sits down. It tells us in Luke chapter 4 that the eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. You could hear the pin drop. The tension was in the air, and Jesus is sitting down now. He just says, Today, this prediction is fulfilled. Drops mic, walks off the stage. Okay, those last two bits aren't in there. But he essentially just sits down and he says, this is it. I am it. I'm the one who brings full life, who brings flourishing. I'm the one who was promised from that time. Jesus is the one who's predicted. He's the one who brings about a new order. You see something of how he operates. He's come to liberate the downtrodden. He's going to bring justice to all who seek it from him. Look how he works, verse 4. He'll strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips, he will slay the wicked. Jesus never laid a finger on any of his enemies. Even when they came to arrest him, even when they came to crucify him, he didn't lay a finger on them. But he brought them low and he humbled them with his words. He spoke against the powers of the day that had people in bonds. He spoke against them and he brought them low and he freed people with his words, with his reason, and with his teaching. And one day everyone will face Jesus, and those who've opposed him will not benefit from his peacemaking work. But what we get here is a vivid picture of the peace that Jesus is going to bring. And what Isaiah uses is he uses words and language from the day so that people could understand the total reversal that's going to happen with this kingdom that comes, with this one who's promised what he's going to bring about. Verse 6, it says, the wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. It's a total reversal of nature's principles. There's some people who have this idea that, humans are these terribly violent people and very aggressive people, but if we could only just get back to nature, if we could only get back to our natural ways. Have you ever looked at nature? Have you ever watched Seven Worlds, One Planet? Nature is violent. Animals rip each other to shreds. The weak are pulverized by the strong. The lame wildebeest gets devoured by the cuddly-looking lion. The chicks that haven't learned to fly get gobbled up for breakfast by the hunting eagle. Nature is a violent place where the strongest survive and the weak are ruined. But, says Isaiah, there's going to be a reversal. A place of peace. That's the picture he used. Maybe we put it in terms that are more easily, the reversal more easily understood for us, where the peace reigns. The Palestinians are going to have coffee with the Israelis. Meghan Markle will do go-karting with the Queen. Kim and Kanye will head hiking for the weekend together. Sinn Féin will throw a banquet for the Tory party. And Roy Keane and Mick McCarthy will book a spa weekend together. The future is going to be one of peace, where there's going to be reversal of animosity and difficulty. It's one of peace and tranquility and life forever. It's the party to end all parties that's coming. It's a party where all of the particular fears, actually, of God's people are going to be removed. They're going to be removed. Look at the end of chapter 11. There'll be a highway for the remnant of his people, it says, that is left from Assyria, as there was for Israel when they came up from Egypt. Isaiah puts it in terms of their immediate fear, which we've said is Assyria. But in this day, in this picture that he gives, there's going to be this highway, this road where they can just walk away from their fears. They can walk out of Assyria back to their own land. This path that's straight and flat and easy to walk in, they can just walk out of there. They won't be enslaved anymore. And it's a picture of us leaving our fears behind. It's a picture of this promised Redeemer who's going to come, the Restorer, who's going to allow us to leave our fears behind. And that's what you're invited to. The people in this picture will nonchalantly and casually walk away from their fears. And that is possible through this Restorer, Jesus. We'll talk more about this next week, but just to give a flavour of chapter 12, we talk about this in a couple of weeks' time, not next week. What we see there is that where these people walk to, where they go to, the destination in a sense in this picture is to a great party. All those who've been united, people who had animosity between each other before. Chapter 11 talks about them, Ephraim, Judah, those in Egypt, Elam, Babylon, Hamath. All of these people who were warring and at odds with each other will join in everlasting celebration with God. This freedom releases us to celebrate and to have a party. I don't know if you're familiar with the Fire Festival. It's been the subject of at least 2 documentaries in the last couple of years. To make a long story short, in 2017, the Fire Festival was promoted extensively by world-famous influencers as a once-in-a-lifetime festival, a luxury festival, an opportunity to experience something unlike anybody had ever experienced before. A music festival on a remote island with luxury villas and just the most extraordinary food and everything just beyond your imagining. And it was promoted and promoted and promoted. But what happened was the organizers ran into great difficulty. What ended up happening was these people who paid thousands to come to this festival that was supposed to be on a remote, beautiful, sandy island with all of this luxury, they ended up sleeping in tents in a car park and had a festival in a car park just beyond a resort hotel on an island that wasn't luxury or remote or its own thing at all. It was a complete letdown. What was promised was massive, but the reality was much less. This party that Jesus invites the world to is no fire festival. The man at the top's influencers aren't self-made social media celebrities, but ordinary people like you and me who have tasted something of the pre-show party. The organizer has the means to back the promises. He doesn't need to book the venue. He owns it. The accommodation isn't luxury villas, but extraordinary mansions. The food is literally out of this world. There is nothing in our minds that can imagine what God has in store for those who put their trust in Jesus Christ. You don't need to be afraid. You get to taste something of this in this life, something of this banquet, something of this party, something of this freedom that God gives. Yes, it's without some of the experiences that we really want in the middle of this pandemic, but God himself is still there. He still gives you his Spirit. He still has provided his rescuer and restorer for you. Our fears can be stilled. We taste something of God. Heaven comes to earth to those who trust Jesus, and we experience something of God's peace. It's more than enough for us to get through and survive, even thrive in a world of pandemic. But it will be even better when the true party gets started, the eternal party, what awaits those who follow Jesus, those who put their trust in the shoot of Jesse, those who are brothers and sisters of the living God. Let's pray.